Welcome to The Explainer. You know those terrifying college campus legends? The kind of ghost stories whispered in dorm rooms late at night for decades? Well, today, we're taking one of those legends and treating it entirely differently. We're actually breaking it down as a structured paranormal cold case. We'll be diving into the raw data, the hands-on technological investigation, and ultimately, the shocking historical truth that was locked away behind a closed door. If you love a mystery that completely blends modern tech with ancient rituals, you are in for an absolutely incredible ride today. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Every single incoming class at this particular college was greeted with this exact chilling warning. There were no official notices, no warning boards, nothing like that. It was just pure inherited fear passed down from seniors to freshmen. But, fear's a funny thing. It paralyzes most people, but for a select few, it actually motivates them. A student named Abhay heard this warning and, well, he didn't just blindly accept it. He realized that simply avoiding the third floor didn't actually solve the problem. His curiosity totally overshadowed his fear, which prompted him to ask a really dangerous question. If something is actually up there, why hasn't anyone tried to figure out what it is? When Abhay and his friends started pushing the administration for answers, the principal tried to shut them down immediately. He brought up a terrifying incident from 12 years prior. Apparently, a junior librarian named Shekhar was found completely unconscious in that very room. His eyes were wide open, paralyzed by sheer fear after hearing his own name whispered in the dark. So what was the college's solution? Just lock the door and pretend it didn't exist, swept right under the rug. But Abhay had grown up listening to his tantric grandfather, so he knew better. His grandfather always taught him that fear doesn't change the truth, and every haunting has a logical root. Basically, an unheard voice that desperately needs to be understood. Realizing the college was never going to permit an official inquiry, Abhay and his friends decided to just take matters into their own hands. But, and this is crucial, they didn't just wander in with flashlights like characters in a cliché horror movie. They took a strictly technological approach. They pulled their money together and secretly brought in Dr. Siddharth Mehta, a professional paranormal investigator. Under the cover of darkness, long after the rest of the campus was dead asleep, they snuck up to that third-floor library to gather hard, empirical data. Now, what's really interesting about this toolkit is how Dr. Mehta blended different methods. His methodology didn't rely on just feelings or, blind superstition. He brought a literal arsenal of gadgets. We're talking EMF meters to detect anomalous electromagnetic fields, thermal sensors to map out sudden unnatural temperature drops, and highly sensitive digital recorders to capture EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena. But brilliantly, he actually grounded all this high-tech gear with traditional tools like sea salt and candles. It was this perfect fusion of modern scientific recording and ancient occult wisdom, completely designed to capture any trace of anomalous energy. Now, you have to understand, an investigation like this isn't a one-and-done event. Dr. Mehta knew that entities often require time to manifest, especially when their environment is suddenly disturbed after years of total isolation. Over the course of 3 consecutive nights of observation, there was a very clear, very terrifying escalation in the paranormal activity. The entity was slowly realizing it was no longer alone. Let's look at night 1. Right out of the gate, the data pointed to a massive energy drain. Literally, the moment they stepped into the suffocating dust-filled air of the library, the EMF meter started ticking wildly. Beep, beep, beep. It was spiking hard, even though the room had absolutely zero active electrical wiring. The overhead tube light flickered and completely died, and when one of the students clicked on a fresh, fully charged flashlight, it dimmed and died almost instantly. Dr. Mehta noted this as a classic first stage. The entity was actively absorbing all the ambient energy in the room just to gather the strength it needed to manifest. By night 2, things really ramped up. The entity had absorbed enough energy to actually affect the physical environment. This is where we see textbook poltergeist activity. Heavy rotting books began physically throwing themselves off the shelves. The students' smartphones, which were sitting at a solid 20% battery, violently drained to 0% in a matter of seconds. But honestly, the most chilling piece of evidence came from the digital recorder. Amidst the dead silence of the room, the device captured low, distinct whispers. They couldn't quite make out the words yet, but it sent a massive shiver down everyone's spine. The spirit was actively trying to communicate. So, that brings us to the crucial point of the investigation. Night 3. This was the breaking point. The team returned to find the heavy wooden doors of the library already blown wide open. Inside, it was a wreck. Heavy tables, chairs, and books were violently scattered all across the floor. The thermal sensors immediately detected an extreme, bone-chilling drop in temperature. The air grew so incredibly heavy that it actually became difficult to breathe, and those EMF meters were practically screaming. The entity was pushing back with aggressive force, sending a crystal clear message. The team had no choice. They were forced to evacuate the library immediately. But here is where this contained cold case suddenly escalated into a full-blown campus-wide crisis. By disturbing the library, the team had effectively uncorked a bottle. That stagnant energy completely spilled out of the third floor and just spread like wildfire across the entire college. Suddenly, panicked students were filing complaints left and right. They were reporting shadows moving in the dormitories. Terrifying crying sounds were echoing through the courtyards late at night. People heard heavy footsteps behind locked washroom doors, and even professors reported seeing a solitary figure just sitting quietly on the last bench of empty classrooms. The haunting was completely out of containment. Naturally, the college administration was furious. They threatened to expel Abhay and his friends on the spot for endangering the students. But Dr. Mehta realized they were all looking at this the completely wrong way. This aggressive activity, it wasn't mindless violence. The falling books, the EVPs, the campus-wide manifestations, it was a desperate attempt to be heard. Which leads us to the absolute most vital question of this entire case. What exactly was this spirit trying to say? To answer that question, Dr. Mehta knew his gadgets had hit a wall. He needed someone who could translate the spiritual data. Enter Satyadev Baba, a traditional, deeply experienced tantric. When Dr. Mehta brought him to the campus, Baba didn't even flinch at the reports of terror. He took one look at the chaotic situation and completely reframed the investigation with a single powerful sentence. He looked right at the terrified principal and said, "This spirit isn't evil, it is angry." Baba didn't waste any time. He immediately initiated what we can really only describe as a spiritual interrogation. He marched straight up to that third-floor library, drew a strict boundary using sea salt to contain the energy, lit specific candles, and began chanting ancient Sanskrit mantras. And the craziest part? As he did this, the room's temperature just plummeted. Dr. Mehta's scientific equipment validated the spiritual ritual perfectly. The EMF meter began to literally scream, completely maxing out its readings. The entity was right there inside the salt circle, and it was finally ready to talk. And then, the digital recorder captured it. The massive, tragic twist of this entire case. A voice, clear as day, broke right through the static on the tape. It said, "I was tied here. I was the librarian 20 years ago. It wasn't my fault. A professor. I filed a complaint. It was murder, framed as suicide." Let that sink in. The entity haunting the library wasn't some kind of monster at all. She was a victim. A woman whose life was brutally taken and whose story was completely intentionally erased by the very institution meant to protect her. And this brilliantly illustrates the dark reality behind so many paranormal legends. You see, for 2 whole decades, the college maintained the official lie that a tragedy had occurred, a suicide, just an unavoidable accident. But the tragic truth was a horrifying cover-up. She was murdered by a professor after bravely filing a grievance. Because the truth was buried, and because she was denied justice and a proper farewell, her trauma became literally trapped in that room, festering over the years into the terrifying energy those students experienced. Now, knowing the full truth, Satyadev Baba knew exactly what steps had to be taken to finally close the case. At exactly 2:30 a.m., they performed the End Him Sanskar, the final liberation ritual, right there in the middle of the library. First, they built a traditional Havan Kund, a sacred fire pit, right in the center of the room. Second, and this is the most important part, they chanted her true name, finally giving her back the identity the college had stolen. Third, they offered symbolic new clothes and pure water. And finally, Baba completed the final rites, officially acknowledging her profound suffering and releasing her from that space. The result? It was instantaneous. And it was beautifully confirmed by Dr. Mehta's technology. The very second the ritual concluded, the screaming EMF meter fell dead silent. The suffocating, freezing air in the library suddenly lifted and was replaced by a completely calm, normal atmosphere. Dr. Mehta checked his digital recorder, and for the first time in 3 nights, it captured absolutely nothing but quiet. The scientific data proved beyond a doubt that the spiritual closure had worked. Peace was finally restored. So what started as just a scary story told to freshmen ended up as a solved murder case and the ultimate liberation of a wronged soul. And I think it leaves us with a really profound takeaway. Fear isn't always about malevolence or evil monsters hiding in the dark. Sometimes a haunting is just an unheard, desperate plea for justice. Uncovering the truth is really the only way to banish the dark. Which kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What dark secrets and silenced voices are currently locked away in the quietest, most avoided rooms of your own town? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and